Welcome to Dynamics of Neuroplasticity. I'll start with why your brain resists change. In sports science, nobody tries to talk a basketball player out of a bad shooting habit by discussing their childhood. They film the shot, isolate the biomechanical triggers, and use deep practice to force a microsecond intervention. The brain doesn't care if you're drilling a physical crossover dribble or a cognitive shift under high stress. The neural wiring process is the same. Yet today, only a small percentage of coaches actually understand how to apply neuroplasticity, either to improve their own lives or the lives of their clients. Skeptical about that? Consider this. Neuroplasticity works in the same way on cognitive processing as it does on physical muscle memory. The difference? With cognitive processing, you're asking the brain to change the neurological loop that's actively fighting to stay the same. This is why so many people conflate neuroplasticity with mindset, but they aren't the same thing. In fact, they operate in completely different systems. This video is an invitation for executive and leadership coaches who value being in the top 2.5%, the top innovators when it comes to neuroplasticity, pushing the envelope of applied neuroplasticity to make this science normal. Here's the problem we're actually fighting. We treat our conscious thoughts and our subconscious habits as if they're the exact same thing, as if they both represent the soul or the true self. They don't. Your conscious mind is where your true self lives, your soul, your spirit, and your deepest desires. Your subconscious, on the other hand, isn't a separate mind at all. It's a biological machine, a massive, complex catalog of lived and imagined experiences stored inside an 11 million bits per second automated association engine. Let's take a look at this slide. As you can see, you got path A without neuroplasticity and path B with neuroplasticity. So the process, you're trying to out-talk the old habit, hoping the network of neurons will somehow figure out how to rebuild itself over time. But when you choose path B, the science-backed path with neuroplasticity, you're directly targeting the automaticity layer. You're intercepting the trigger instantly and intentionally injecting a new default track. That new path of least resistance results in the old one going dormant. Now, actually, it doesn't matter what your favorite go-to framework or processes are. Virtually all of them are operating in a different system than neuroplasticity, so you can continue using them. Now listen to the next row, the experience. Without neuroplasticity, change can be high friction and painful. It is a constant battle against your own biology, which is why people can feel stuck in an endless cycle of relapse. Candidly, choosing the science-backed path is also hard. Directly rewiring your network of neurons in real time feels like trying to change the tires on a moving car. It requires intense, deliberate focus at the moment of friction. But because you're working with biology, it's ultimately refreshing because that change comes without the needed vigilance to avoid a relapse. This is why it enables breaking through the comfort zone so effectively. Now the outcome. The blind path is slow and fragile. It can take months, years, or even decades of talking through the story to see progress. And it remains highly vulnerable to collapsing under stress. The neurobiology-based path is fast, sustainable, and reliable even under high-stress conditions because it creates a purpose-aligned new neural baseline very early in the stimulus reaction response cycle. I'm talking the first 600 milliseconds in the 1-second model. When I hear people talk about neuroplasticity, it gets bogged down in academic jargon. They focus on the physical parts of the brain or complex processing maps. There's plenty of language around what the brain is, just like with emotional intelligence, but this approach ignores how the brain actually operates in real-time situations. It's a half second at a time, tens of thousands of times a day. This whole first section over here, this is that first 600 milliseconds. It's the first half second plus the pre-listening phase. This is what's happening in the brain, the network of neurons, what was for so long thought of as the subconscious mind. It's actually a network of neurons, trillions of connections, trillions of associations that fire off. And you've heard neurons that wire together, fire together. That's the world of neuroplasticity, this first 600 milliseconds. And the reason it's 600 again is because there's about a tenth of a second on the pre-listening. The other thing is, research tells us there's approximately 30,000 stimulus reaction response cycles happening to us every single day. That means every other second we're going through this process, which is why you can see people getting triggered, people getting knocked off course, and despite their best intentions, they're just not able to get themselves to do what they really want to do. That's because this side is so fast and gets the jump on the conscious mind. Now, if you're not working in that half-second window, you're potentially adding years to what could be a simple transformation. A transformation that can be achieved in hours, days, or weeks. This is the domain of the 1-second model. True lasting change doesn't happen willy-nilly, or by talking about what's important, or even the history of your habits. It happens within the first half second of a stimulus. The critical window where your automated association engine fires before your conscious thought can even take the wheel. This 600 millisecond window is the true domain of neuroplasticity. When you intercept the trigger here, you're executing a veto at the same speed and in the same system as the rapid-fire massive association engine. It makes the impact much higher and the effort much lower when you're operating this early in the system. Once it transfers over to the conscious mind, your impact is low and your effort is high. This is why people can spend years and even decades trying to make a meaningful change. We're all familiar with this concept of the conscious mind. We're going along, but we also have the subconscious, and I'll also call that the network of neurons, and then the higher self. So those are the three entities that are familiar. The conscious mind processes at 50 bits per second. It's so slow. That's what I was talking about. It's far behind the speed of life that we're experiencing today. The subconscious, it being a network of neurons, neural pathways with energy flowing through those neural pathways, you can see why it can process at 11 million bits per second. The same way you can receive a text or email from someone halfway around the world in less than a second. And then we have the higher self. And these are important, which is why they're also the first three in my 7 performance series: mental, physical, and spiritual. And the spiritual is not the spiritual realm, it's the higher self. It's our awareness of awareness. When we have a major shift in our lives, we change jobs, we start a business, we're expecting something like this, that nice inflection point. Too often, it just continues the same. We just continue going along the same as everyone else. This is elusive. This is very difficult using just the conscious mind, because you need all three operating together. You need the alignment from the subconscious and you need the alignment from the higher self to make that happen. And let's just say this is some period of time. More than 2 years, less than 20, some period of time. And we're moving along and we have these stimulus reaction responses. Something happens, we see it, we make a choice, we move on. Something else happens, we make a choice, we see it, we move on. But every once in a while, something may happen and it's big enough, it gets our attention, and next thing you know, we're spiking up a little bit. We're getting a little bit of emotion involved. And before we can come back down, we start thinking about other things that are related to it and how there may be some other problems. And that creates a little bit more of a spike. And next thing you know, we start imagining how what's happening today is very similar to what happened sometime in the past that turned into a big problem. Now you're up here. If we can get ourselves back on track, we can find ourselves coming back down, and then we're back onto the, take a blip, reset, take a blip, reset. But what happens if this just keeps going? What happens if we don't get to reset? And we keep coming up with new problems and new ways that this is going to turn into something much worse. If it stays too long, we end up in this higher level. It's no longer coherence down here. We're in this heightened state. And that heightened state, it's because of the cortisol, adrenaline, essentially fight or flight. But now it's more neurobiological. that fight or flight, it's like a chemical cocktail that's coursing through our system. And you don't have to look far to have experienced it. You know how long that could last. It could last several hours as this chemical process needs to work its way through the body. So that's a big difference between being able to come back down versus staying up here. And this is not the conscious mind. This is the automaticity that can be adjusted with neuroplasticity. Keep in mind, we have 33,000 on average stimulus reaction cycles per day. So this could represent just 815 to 820. That puts it in perspective. And we have all seen it, right? You're scrolling through email in the morning and you see something that is going to be a problem. And this happens. Now, if you can come back down, great. If you stay up here, that's not so good. What we do with neuroplasticity is break this down so you understand, first of all, you won't experience this. And if you do experience it, it's going to be lower and you'll be able to come back down faster. We're going to take this out of play because this is a process that can be adjusted with neuroplasticity. There's one more thing I'll mention. So while we have 33,000 stimulus response cycles, that's roughly 1 every other second. But when this happens, we get about 90 seconds to get it back on track. It's beyond the scope of right now, but it has to do with how we process emotions. And I'm not talking about what is talked about in emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is predominantly working on the conscious mind side. We're talking about the network of neurons, the subconscious, the 11 million bits per second, where there's no language here. So redrawing this, we take this segment, and it's really just a very, very small slice of our life. This is the 1 second model. We're going to break it down to pre-stimulus, early detection, rapid appraisal, reaction formation, and then conversion to something that the conscious mind can perceive as thought. This is the first half second of the 1 second model. Then from there, we have conscious awareness, and we have response formation. This is all happening in 1 second. I use the models to, one, illustrate what's going on, and to notice where the weak links are, where the bottlenecks are. If you look at emotional intelligence work mostly sits over here. Because when emotional intelligence was created in the mid-90s, the brain scanning tools were not available for researchers to see that it's not a subconscious mind. It's not something that's fixed. Identity is not fixed. Personality, intelligence, those things are not fixed. It's a network of neurons, a network of literally trillions of associations. And those associations can be rewired using neuroplasticity. Of course, after this, we have the response. So this is where we focus. This is why I say that we can rewrite this narrative up here so that this doesn't happen. This all is designed to keep us alive, and it's essentially we've evolved from hunter-gatherer over the last 300,000 years. The majority of that, 299,000 of those years, has essentially been without the machines, the technology, the various aids, and the information that we have today. So most of that 300,000, like virtually 99.99% of it, has been hunter-gatherer. So it makes sense that our evolution has evolved to support that. When you look at neuroscience, you'll see over and over and over these findings make so much sense when you look at it from a hunter-gatherer standpoint. Neuroscience is in its infancy, at least the way we know it today. And if it's taken this long to evolve to where we are and the brain hasn't changed much over that period of time, I don't expect to see neuroplasticity and this ability to rewire the subconscious change much in the near future. What can change is our understanding of it and how we can apply it and how we can leverage it. And that's what can grow. There's one more model I'll quickly show just to say, so you can see how this plays out, because I talked about the 1 second model, and the 1 second model comes under the 7-step reset. The 7-step reset is the model we use to rewrite the conditioning. Again, we're having 33,000 stimulus reaction cycles a day. We don't have to change all 33,000 of those. You change just a few and you can change the trajectory of your life. So you notice I don't call it stimulus response. It's stimulus reaction and then response. And the response is step 4. This 1 second model, this is all step 3.
in my 7-step reset. There's 1 and 2 are to make sure that we're in a good state of coherence, because the more we are in coherence, the less likely we're going to be triggered. Just at a high level, step 1 is knowledge and understanding. You have to understand how it works. And I always say to know and not do is to not know. So I get it. I agree that you need more than knowledge, but you have to have the baseline understanding of what's going on, and that the subconscious is not a mind, it's really a network of neurons, and then how you engage. Otherwise, you're falling back to the solutions of the conscious mind side, things like mindset and priming, which are important. Beliefs, those are all important, but they can all be hijacked by the network of neurons, and which is why we have to understand how it works. And we talk about priming, neuroplasticity, mindset, physiology, as well as beliefs in this step 1. Then we have the coherence, and people may try to get to coherence, but it starts with present moment. And that present moment happens in that 1-second model. In the middle, in the transition from the reaction formation to the conscious awareness, that's that present moment when you can hold attention in that moment. So you're not letting the response simply equal the reaction. That's when you're on your way to present moment. And when you're in the present moment, you're more likely to have coherence. And that's important, because the more coherence you have, the less room you have for chaos and rigidity. When you have low coherence, you have a lot of room for chaos and rigidity. Chaos is like drama and heading towards crashing out. Rigidity is like a fixed mindset. Now, I was talking about the sides. I call it the conscious mind side and the network of neurons side. And this is basically the 1-second model. In the 1-second model, you have the first 600 milliseconds. It's 1/10 of a second for pre-listening. And then you have your 5/10 of a second. And then over here, you have another half second. Of course, it's a little bit less than a half second on the conscious mind side. But remember, we should be pausing. And people try to have that pause between reaction and response. But if you're already triggered and it's happening at the 11 million bits per second, you've lost the initiative. Using automaticity to have that pause sits there between reaction for response formation and your actual response. That's why the response is a step 4. That's why it's separate. What's interesting is if you look at it with muscle memory and coaches spend very little time intellectualizing, and they get on the field and they're practicing, they're drilling. When you look at human development, personal development, leadership development, etc., people spend most of the time intellectualizing over here on the conscious mind side and very little time in practice. Eavesdrop in on a sales meeting or leadership meeting, you'll see some role play, but it's a lot more talking and discussing and insights. We should be doing more role play, because in the role play, that's when you're practicing with the network of neurons, just like you would be with muscle memory on the field. And it's not muscle memory, it's nervous system memory. And then the neurons respond the same way, whether it's cognitive processing or physiological. And I talk about not needing the parts of the brain. We get lost in the parts of the brain. And this is where neuroscience tends to take us. It's where emotional intelligence tends to take us, because it was thought that the subconscious was a mind and it wasn't understood. We have to get away from talking about the parts of the brain for lay people, because all the neurons behave and respond the same way. If I want to change my path of least resistance, which is basically a habit, in a physical activity, I approach the network of neurons the same way that I approach them when it's cognitive processing and a habit, whether it's a reaction habit or a behavioral habit or an identity. I can change those with neuroplasticity the same way I can change muscle memory in an athlete who wants to make a move. The other thing I mentioned, so the 3 different habit types, you have behavioral, you have reactive, and you have identity type constructs. Behavioral habits, most people feel like professionally, oh yeah, I can solve my habits. I've learned to not interrupt. I can stop scrolling social media. I run when I'm supposed to run. I go to the gym when I'm supposed to go to the gym. Those are behavioral habits, no problem. The reactive habits are harder. These are the triggers. And the solution for reactive habits tends to be avoidance, because it's hard to wrangle that in. We'll solve that with neuroplasticity 100%. And then you have the identity type habits, identity and personality. And this is why my favorite client to work with is a person who thinks they've tried everything, because when you're attempting to change identity and personality, these are constructs, and you're trying to change them at the construct level, this is a non-starter. That would be like a coach going in and trying to optimize a play, a complex play at the play level. No, they first start with the individual movements and the skills of each part of that play and working on the weak links. You know, I agree we should be working on strengths, but you have to have the weak links up to a point where it's not going to hurt, right? So you have the coach is going to work with the individual players, get their skills up to where they need to be, get them moving, and then they build on those skills working together until it becomes a play. Trying to change a play at the construct level is difficult. It's even more difficult to change a personality at the construct level because you have the reactions, you have all the associations, trillions and trillions of associations in the network of neurons. You have all the habits, the 0 to 7 conditioning, which is different than the next person's 0 to 7 conditioning. So all this data about how to change, it doesn't hold up. Essentially, the brain is an efficient machine, and neuroplasticity has a high metabolic demand. And so the brain is always being efficient. The reason why hacks don't work, why they're not sustainable, is because they get absorbed into the homeostasis. Remember, the brain and the central nervous system are biased towards having us live in that familiar zone. And so as you introduce a hack, yes, it works for a little bit, but it gets absorbed. You have 100 billion neurons, each connected with thousands of other neurons. There's just way too many associations. And what happens is people, they fall right back to doing things the way it's always been done. With neuroplasticity, you literally stop the old loop before it starts. Now, there is a fundamental challenge here. We live in a world where we rely on verbal communication, but the system I'm talking about doesn't use words. It uses electrical signals, pulsing through a vast network of neurons. Things are happening too fast and essentially in a completely different language. But that language is predictable and it repeats over and over. To take a leader from the chaotic first few milliseconds all the way to mastery, I use a framework that simplifies your side of the process with models and a methodology. Once you learn the steps, it gets easier and easier, and it becomes natural. And let me be clear, you don't have to stop using your favorite coaching processes. Those tools are fine. They aren't the weak link. The weak link is expecting conversations to change neurobiology. Once you start using the models, the system is very supportive. Once you begin seeing the world through the lens of the 1-second model, neuroplastic solutions become both your first and your last line of defense. If you receive this video, you're likely part of a group of executive and leadership coaches or C-suite executives who have coaches in your organization. I'm not looking for a massive crowd. I'm looking for the right professionals to join me inside my private Dynamics of Neuroplasticity Group, where we get to apply neuroplasticity to real-world situations and make the kind of distinctions that make everyone better. Through a combination of roundtable discussions, high-performance closed training, and real-time application with actual client scenarios, we will further flesh out nuances in these models together. As a participant, you'll get the dual benefit of spaced repetition interspersed with immediate real-world application, and experience firsthand the reliability and practicality of neuroplasticity-based solutions. If you're ready to stop talking about the story, take a look, kick the tires, and if it's a fit, there's many ways for you to benefit. If not, you'll still have access to my exclusive content so you can track the group's journey. Click the link that's with this video to opt into the group. You'll be glad you did. I'll see you on the other side.